The cathedral bells toll at an hour no priest would claim. Candles shiver on the altar as a physician in oiled black cloth lifts a brass censer and names it a ritual of preservation. He invites the frail to step forward, mothers with red eyes, old men with trembling hands, a chorister whose breath whistles, smoke to guard the soul, medicine to spare the flesh, he murmurs. And the iron gate of the crypt yawns like a promise. They descend in a small procession, prayer beads clicking, incense sweetening the fear. Below the altar, he lowers the wicks and arranges linen screens as if dressing a sacrament. Tags are tied to wrists with quiet string. In his black book, whole names become initials that look more obedient than people. He smiles without teeth. The faithful call it mercy. He calls it order. And when the gate closes with a careful hymn of iron, the church above hears only psalms while the crypt learns a different liturgy, intervals, exposures, and the patience of the living. Asterisk, asterisk, York, 1349. The plague teaches even stone to hold its breath. Parish doors stay open for prayer and closed for everything else. Into this nervous mercy walks a physician who speaks like a confessor and measures like a clerk. He brings a black book, a case that chimes, and a promise dressed as ritual, a sacred quarantine beneath the altar incense to seal sanctity, draughts to steady the lungs, darkness to rest the blood. The dean hears order where others hear desperation. The crypt becomes a ward by decree, pallets chalked on flagstones, candles rationed until flame is an accent, incense scheduled the way bells are. The faithful accept the invitation because faith is a door that prefers to open. Mothers volunteer for their children. Old men volunteer for themselves. The chorister volunteers because his breath already has a whistle in it, and he would like to sing again at the rail. The physician ties tags to wrists with priestly care. He writes full names in his book, then narrows each to initials with a neatness that looks like kindness from far away. To protect reputations, he explains, and the crowd nods. No one wants their sorrow read aloud. He lowers the wicks, winds the censer, and the air chooses to smell like obedience. The gate is heavy, so two vergers lift it. The physician sets the latch alone. Above, the choir stalls glimmer. Below, linen screens learn to hang like veils over a ceremony the church does not know it's hosting. Every rule he speaks sounds like hygiene. Every gesture he makes is practice repeatable, portable, because a ritual that travels can always find another congregation. Asterisk, asterisk. He began with hymns because hymns lowered the guard. In the nave, he lifted the censer and named the smoke a shield for the fragile, he said. And his eyes sought them the way a butcher knows the weight of cuts, the widow with the tremor, the stonemason with a cough, the chorister who blinked too often between notes. He praised their courage softly, then counted them silently. 1, 2, 3. Forge, number a click in a lock inside his head. The procession felt holy on purpose. Beads touched lips, shoulders brushed pillars, cooled by centuries. He kept the pace unhurried, so fear could call itself reverence. At the crypt mouth, he spoke the canon of cleanliness, limited light, disciplined breath, silence to tame panic. The vergers lifted the iron gate. He rested his palm on it, as a man rests his hand on a familiar beast. Below, he dressed the room like an altar, pallets squared by chalk. Linen screens hung so shadows fell where he wanted questions to end. Candles lowered until flame became a secret. He tied tags to wrist names at first and then, when he opened his book, converted them to initials that behaved better. To guard reputations, he said. It sounded like charity. It felt like erasure. He asked the dean to pray upstairs for an hour. The first interval is the most delicate. The dean, relieved to do something recognizably holy, obeyed. When the last foot cleared the stair, the physician set the latch with a touch that lingered. The gate hummed shut. Ian singing the smallest amen. He moved among the living with a craftsman's appetite barely hidden by manners. 2 fingers on a wrist to teach a pulse's rhythm. A draft measured in the arc of the censer. A word placed just so steady that the chest obeyed. He noted which eyes followed the smoke, which breath surrendered first to its count. His smile arrived only when he wrote. The quill found the column where all tenderness becomes intervals. The faithful thanked him for the quiet. He thanked the quiet for the faithful. Under the altar, the air learned to sit, to stay, to heal. Above, the choir began Compline, notes climbing through stone. He listened for the places where music paused. Those were the spaces where a key could turn without being heard. Asterisk, asterisk, he called it a vigil and made it breathe like a machine. Candles lowered until gold turned to throat, incense braided into thicker cords. The censer's chain ticking at a tempo the heart could learn. Inhale on the bell, he murmured, and before any bell rang, he rang them 2 fingers at the rest. A pulse persuaded to keep time. He anointed foreheads with a draught that smelled of rue and winter apples. A seal against the pest, he promised, and added 3 drops to the tongue, counting them as if they were absolutions. The widow's tremor slowed. The stonemason's cough folded into itself. The chorister's breath, taught to arrive on command, came almost beautiful obedient as a psalm. He divided the faithful the way a deacon divides bread, the steady to one side, the suggestible to another. Linen screens turned the crypt into chapels within a chapel. Behind one, he set a stool and a brazier and trimmed the wick until the flame kept a secret. For the most fragile, he told the vergers, sending them to carry news to the dean. Alone, his voice changed shape. Sit, he said, to the first chosen. Let the smoke hold you. He measured the distance between rib and rope, the moment when a swallow chooses not to finish, the way eyelids agree to stay. He wrote these obediences in a tight hand. Expose, short, turn, long, come read. Names he had written, whole at the rail, narrowed to initials in the book. Then to signs that saved ink and told him everything. When fear tried to remember itself, he gave it a task. Count this prayer on your breath. When faith tried to interfere, he gave it a proof. See, the pulse finds mercy. He taught them to mistake stillness for healing, darkness for care. Above, the choir ended, and the dean paused at the stair, listening. Below, the censer swung, and the iron gate considered the virtue of remaining shut. He visited each small chapel in a circuit that never crossed itself. The draught shifted by a drop or 2. The smoke learned sharper discipline. The ledger acquired a clean corner for the living. He praised compliance as piety and hunger as humility. When a hand reached for his sleeve, he offered it the book to bless with a fingertip. The ink took the print like a relic takes a kiss by the time the dean returned. The crypt sounded orderly, breath braided to the chain, prayers reduced to a soft mathematics. The first interval is complete, the physician said, and the words meant nothing anyone could argue with, and everything he needed. Asterisk, asterisk. He called it a side chapel and folded it into a secret. 2 linen screens met to make a narrow mouth. Beyond, the stone grew cooler and the light learned manners. He set the brazier low so flame hummed instead of spoke. Tools lived beneath cloth forceps that looked like tidy fingers, scissors that preferred not to glitter. Nothing in the room contradicted a church. Everything in it obeyed him. Breathe with the chain, he told the widow, and the censer swung left, right, pausing where yes lives. He counted on her wrist until her pulse forgot it had choices. Rest, he told the stonemason, and trimmed the wick until the stone in his chest softened into obedience. For the chorister, he offered a draught that tasted like a hymn's last note, sweet, small, complete. Hold the note, he whispered, and the boy's breath obliged, a thread that refused to fray. He wrote, while they learned, neat initials in a left column, numerals in a right, little verbs between expose, turn, .com. When space grew tight, he invented marks that meant more than words and took less time to write. The ledger pleased him the way music pleases a choir master when every voice arrives exactly where it should. A reliquary gleamed through the screen, bones sleeping under glass. He angled a candle so the light bent away from it and toward his page. Sanctity is an excellent solvent, he murmured, not to the saints, but to the ink. Above, a footfall wandered the nave and lost interest. Below, the gate held its vow. When a tremor tried to return, he fed it a smaller task: 3 sips, 2 breaths, 1 pause, and watched it obey. When an eye flickered open, he furnished it with an object to cross-shadow. The rim of a ball, something harmless to stare at, while the math completed. He praised compliance as faith and failure as an excess of fear he would kindly take away. Once, the chorister reached for his hand. He let the glove be taken and counted how long it took warmth to decide to stay. Brave, he said, and his voice held the soft gravity of an absolution. He boxed the moment on the page with a tidy mark he liked more each time he used it. The sensor slowed. The room remembered how to be very still. He wound the chain once and listened. Breath braided to metal, hearts arriving on the same step, the stone itself keeping time. He closed the ledger a finger's width, then opened again, testing how silence held. Second interval, he said, and the crypt, ever obedient, accepted the name. Storm air pressed at the stained glass until colors shivered on the nave. Below, the crypt breathed as one body. He set the ledger beside the reliquary and let the candle lean so the page shone and the bone did not. A scrap of parchment waited under the book's cover. His traveling can increased to the shape of a habit pocket. He copied it into the cathedral's language with a care that looked like devotion. Left margin for initials, right margin for times. Little verbs between expose, turn, come, repeat. Where the stone steps narrowed, he drew a square and labeled it gate. Where the censor paused, he drew a circle and wrote bell. A tidy mark his favorite box sat beside the section for the living. He tapped it once with a quill, teaching the page to remember. A sacristan drifted near the screen, restless with errands he could not finish. He glimpsed the diagram and mistook it for a plan of vigils. Father, he whispered to the air, because the physician's black cloth looked briefly like a cassock. A ritual requires order, the physician said, voice low as ash. Carry this to the dean. The choir must keep silence until the second interval ends. The boy nodded, relieved to have a rule he could hold. He turned to the faithful and tuned them like an organ. The widow's tremor answered to short burn. The stonemason's cough obeyed long turn. The chorister's breath, sweetest instrument, steadied and repeat until calm. He wrote the obedience down and praised it with a word that could pass for blessing. The ledger accepted the compliments humbly. From the nave came a footfall, then another, then the hush people make when they decide to trust. He listened for doubt and supplied a demonstration. Lowered light, slower smoke, a pulse that learned to land exactly when the chain did. See, he told the verger, who had returned with questions. Sanctity thrives on discipline. His questions, kindly answered, forgot themselves. When the dean arrived at last, the crypt wore a composure that flattered him. They rest, the dean said, relief dulling the edge of his fear. They are preserved, the physician agreed, and turned a page so the neat columns could stand witness. The dean, who did not read numbers as stories, saw only tidiness and the mercy of sleep. He guided him back toward the stair with gratitude arranged on his face. At the latch, he let the dean lift, and when the gate found its seat again, the iron sang a softer note than before, pleased to have learned when to close. Alone, he traced the boxed mark in the margin and drew a small arrow no one else would notice. It pointed to a blank space reserved for departure. The censor slowed until the chain made silence audible. He set the ledger beneath the reliquary shadow and watched their shapes rhyme. bone and book, relic and record, faith and fact. Third interval, he said. And the stones agreed by doing nothing at all. Night gathered its hymns and learned to move without sound. He let the censer finish a last small circle, then stilled the chain with 2 fingers, as if quiet were a creature to be stroked. The faithful lay arranged as if a choir had been set down and told to rest between verses, hands folded, breath obedient, eyes choosing not to open. He straightened a tag that had forgotten its place and closed the linen screens so doubt would meet fabric instead of faces. At the stair, the latch considered its vow. He lifted it a finger's width and listened to the nav exhale, stone cooling, candles counting down, the faint rasp of a broom far off in the transept. The dean would come at dawn for a word he could carry to the city preserved, stabilized, spared. Words travel better than names. He returned to the ledger and gave it its final courtesies. Initials behaved in the left margin. Times agreed in the right. Between them, the same small verbs that had learned to sound like care. He drew his boxed mark where the living are kept, and then, beside it, a neat arrow that never points backward. At the top of a clean page, he wrote 1 sentence for the next church to recognize. Sanctity thrives on discipline. Begin with silence. The reliquary watched without judgment. He turned the candle so bone would bless the book and not the door. Then he folded his tools into their polite shapes, wiped the brazier's lip, and let the wick drop to an ember patient as a seed. The crypt kept its promise. No cry, no scrape, only breath settling into the parish's memory like incense into stone. The side door to the cloister had learned his touch. He eased it open to a corridor of cold air and lavender damp from last week's funeral. The courtyard well held a moon the color of iron. He crossed with the gait of a man who has never been late to anything. At the gate, he looked once at the towerette, the bell that would choose. Before matins, an hour no priest had written down, and he smiled without teeth. By morning, the dean would find the ledger warmed by the candle's last breath, and read what he could read: order, mercy, sleep. The parish would thank Providence for a ritual that protected the most fragile. A pair of vergers would deny, gently, that they had locked the gate too soon. And the faithful, lighter by a handful, would call it prudence to preserve the rest. Miles away, another church keeps its doors open for prayer and closed for everything else. A physician with a black book waits at the rail, voice low, manners clean, censer in hand. He invites the frail to step forward. Smoke to guard the soul, medicine to spare the flesh. The iron gate practices its amen. The ledger opens to a blank page that already knows what to say. If the crypt stayed with you, like the video and subscribe to the Macabre Physician.